Welcome to another episode of Mentally Damaged. I'm your host, Tim, here with my co-host, David, today. Today we're going to touch on the topic of the Yaupon Cove Property Owners Association and their deed restrictions. About a year and a half to 2 years ago, I did a kind of a expose type thing. I did lots of research, talked to several different attorneys about the situation, and released all that information that I was able to dig up through several different YouTube videos. Now, the situation has changed in Yaupon Cove. Namely, I no longer live there, thankfully. But I do get information coming in from people out there. I've got a lot of questions coming in, so I wanted to make a little video and a podcast letting people know what I have learned since the last video. Now, a basic rundown is, to bring people that haven't heard about this up to speed, is that the Yaupon Cove Property Owners Association has deed restrictions. For those that don't know what a property owners association is, a property owners association or a homeowners association is a association that takes care of particular neighborhoods. They are set in stone by deed restrictions. Some of them expire. Some of them are perpetual. It varies on how the association is set up and how the deed restrictions are set up. It should be noted that I am not an attorney. I am not offering anyone legal advice. This is just my opinion and the opinions of those that I've spoke to about the issues. With that said, there are many issues. One is the deed restrictions and the bylaws that they had when I made the previous video contradicted each other. Second, the deed restrictions are expired. They had a date that they had to renew them by. They didn't take that vote to renew them. Therefore, they expired. There were no deed restrictions at all from a legal standpoint. Again, I'm not a lawyer, but this is what an attorney told me when I called and asked about it. I was informed that because they had been allowed to expire, that they would actually have to reform the association. Now, they've already got the corporation started. That doesn't expire. But because the bylaws are incorrect and the deed restrictions are incorrect, they would actually have to go around and get enough signatures to reform the association and reinstitute deed restrictions. And then they would have to go in, create this set of deed restrictions, and then allow the people to vote on each individual deed restriction, not just the restrictions paperwork as a whole. Now, this is what I was told by 3 different attorneys.
Yeah, you said that the corporation is still intact, okay? Now, the question I've got on that, because if I'm not mistaken, in the state of Texas, you have to renew or do paperwork or something to keep your corporation in good standing with the state every year, right?
Depending on the type of corporation, you may have to file paperwork on a franchise tax, but in the state of Texas, once you register a corporation, depending on the type, it's perpetual. It's there until you cancel it.
Okay, because some states I do know, if you don't do your annual paperwork or whatever, they'll dissolve or something with your corporation, which makes it no good now. And
yes, that varies state to state.
Right.
Yeah, that varies state to state. Now, moving along to what I've learned since I moved out of the Cove myself, right before I moved, they notified some people, not everybody. And the reason I know they didn't notify everybody is my parents had a residence in that subdivision as well. My parents received the notification, but we did not. Even though we were still property owners, my wife and I, we received no type of notification of the vote. I spoke to several neighbors that knew nothing about it. And these are people that were supposedly friends with people on the Property Owners Association, yet they knew nothing about it. So if that doesn't smell like horse shit, I don't know what does.
I don't know if horse shit would be a worse word, but yeah, okay.
Right. So what happens is they, and again, this is what I have been told. I was not personally there. So what I've been told, again, from multiple sources, is that they sent this notification out to some people, not everybody. Then they had this meeting. At this meeting, what actually happened is we're really unsure, because the people that are for the POA say that the POA took a vote to redo the deed restrictions, and it passed. The people that aren't really for or against the POA say that they took a vote and they could not get enough votes to agree to redo the deed restrictions, therefore they were dead in the water. Well, after this meeting, no matter what happened, again, if we go back to what the attorneys I had spoke to said, that because the deed restrictions are expired, they would have to create new ones, and people would get to vote on each individual restriction, not the restrictions as a whole. But that's not what they did. Instead, several months went by, and suddenly they had new deed restrictions. No one that I'm aware of ever received a copy of these new deed restrictions. Now, bear in mind, it's my interpretation of the law that no matter how you're going to have people vote on the deed restrictions, you have to provide a written copy of these new restrictions 30 days in advance of the vote for people to vote whether or not they go into effect. So that's not even possible. That could not have happened because, again, they supposedly start talking about these new deed restrictions, the POA did, that they had, but no one's seen them. Okay. Well, they start going around telling people that they have these deed restrictions and that in these new deed restrictions, they can fine you for arbitrary things that again, you don't know about because you haven't seen it. Now, what's your question, David?
I was going to stop you there for a minute because it's also my understanding that as a property owner in a place like that has a homeowners association, okay, that if they do change the deed restrictions, you're supposed to get a copy of the new ones after they pass.
Yes, you're also supposed to get a copy of them after they pass. And they have to, again, my interpretation of the law, as well as what an attorney told me, they can't just email it to you. They have to provide a written copy, either through the mail or hand delivered to your front door.
Okay.
Now, if it gets lost in the mail, which that does happen, then that's just part of life. So one or two people don't get it. But the fact that that notice about that meeting, that the biggest part of the subdivision didn't get notice about it, means that they deliberately didn't notify anyone that they didn't think would vote against it.
Right.
Now, it's my understanding that since they have done this, they put these new deed restrictions into effect, that they have actually hopped on their vehicle or hopped on their golf carts, the POA board members, that is, and driven around to different houses that they didn't like the look of it, they didn't like the grass, whatever, and told these people, you're going to have to do this or we're going to fine you. Now, I want to stop right there and I want to clarify. I'm not saying that it's wrong to fine someone for violating the deed restrictions. Okay, if you move into a subdivision that has the deed restrictions, then that's going to be part of the reason you moved there, so that these things are enforced, so that you don't feel like you're living in the ghetto per se.
Right.
Because there's someone there other than the city, the county, the state, to step in and say, no, what you're doing is not acceptable. However, in Yaupon Cove, with the deed restrictions being the way they were, whether they were expired or not, that even comes down to the point where even that is irrelevant, because they've spent the last 20 years not enforcing anything, even before it was expired. They only enforced it on the people that they felt it needed to be enforced on. So you could have two neighbors, both of them not cutting their grass, both of them with run-down vehicles in the yard, but neighbor A knows Joe Blow that's on the POA, neighbor B doesn't know anybody on the POA. So neighbor A doesn't get harassing phone calls or letters, but neighbor B gets all kind of harassing phone calls and letters. So that's the basic rundown of it. Again, I've had several people ask if what I said in the previous video was still the situation. No, it is not. In my opinion, the situation now is much, much worse, because it's my opinion that they fraudulently created these new deed restrictions, and they do that. They filed them with the county, and a lot of people think that because something's filed with the county, that makes it legal, and so they don't argue. But that is not the case. I can take a deed down to the county and file it and have so many typos on it that it's not valid, that it will not hold up in court. But the fact of the matter is, if you go pay the county to file something in their records, they will most likely file it for you. They are not attorneys. It is not their responsibility to make sure it's valid. That is your responsibility as the person filing the document. So they do not research this type of stuff. Now, I did contact the district attorney for the area. I contacted the district attorney's office and asked about this while I was making the video. And one of their assistant district attorneys actually wanted to dig into this because they said the same thing I had been told, that this is not legal, that this should not be happening, that this is criminal. However, the actual district attorney, the ADA's boss, said, no. Let these people go hire a lawyer and deal with it, and then if they win in a civil suit, then we'll do something about the criminal charges, maybe. So that's for that local government in the area. You know, this is what the people elected. This is what you get.
Yeah.
I do not anticipate posting any further updates about Yaupon Cove, their deed restrictions. As I've said previously, I don't live there anymore. My family doesn't live there anymore. We've moved away, bought almost as much property as exists inside Yaupon Cove itself, living in the middle of the woods, where we have no neighbors right next door to bother us or anybody to tell us, hey, you can't mow the yard at 2 o'clock in the morning. Well, if I want to go outside and mow the yard at 2 in the morning, I'm not irritating anybody. So I'm where I'm happy.